Hello, everybody. We're just going to give it another minute. I see there are a lot of folks that are still joining us. Hello to Anne Pomerantz and hello to Catherine Box. It's great to see you today. Is that a winter sweater I see there, Dr. Box?
It is indeed a winter sweater. It is cold today. No sun. And, as some of you know, if you were here yesterday, I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, so it is winter. And say I miss summer.
You're not missing much.
My family has told me what I've been missing. Anne, do you have sun today? No, Anne is also in the Southern
Hemisphere, but it is now very cloudy.
Yeah.
And about to be very foggy.
Anne and I are both in the Southern Hemisphere, so.
65 degrees here in England. So I guess it's always winter here.
Oh no, I was in England. I was in England last week. It was wonderful.
Oh, really?
I was in Switzerland last week and the weather was nice. It wasn't too hot. It was like a nice sun. And I've come back here and I'm like, what is going on?
Humidity.
I normally live in New Jersey. I'm just here on vacation and New Jersey is pretty hot at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes, I heard it got warm again. My family's in Philadelphia, so that's what I had heard. And possible thunderstorms, is that right?
Quite possible.
That is correct, because I have the house ring attached to my phone. And I'm like, what's going on? Why is service going in and out? And I thought it's my older kids. They're in their 20s, just trying to disconnect rings. So I don't know what's going on. But it was actually the internet switching on and off because of the thunderstorms.
So those of you that are in the Northeast, you possibly may have spotty internet. Elizabeth, you have no excuse. You have to stay with us the whole time. We know it's.
So I guess my question is, as I am looking at your sweater, you are in prime alpaca country. I mean, will you be coming home with suitcases full of Andean sweaters or?
No, I will not.
I take size large, by the way. So.
Yes, okay. I bought one for myself and one for my daughter. That's it. Everybody else gets an alpaca sweater because I only have so much room.
Let's put the money in
But I did get it at the Pueblita that's near where Anne is. They have lovely sweaters there.
Great. All right. Yeah, we still got a few folks rolling in, so we'll just give it another minute. We're at a robust 49 to 50 in attendance, which is getting on par with where we were yesterday.
Excellent.
It's exciting. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and names back from yesterday.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us again.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Totally different topic today. So if you weren't here yesterday, no worries.
That's right. Not a continuation.
You'll soon figure out that Dr. Pomerantz and Dr. Box are very well-rounded. So the variety of topics on tap is at any given moment really quite profound. So.
Mm-hmm.
That's the advantage of age, right?
There we are. Well,
a lot of time to learn things.
The disadvantage is that you prepare your materials only to realize that you've given this workshop before, but you didn't remember.
And so you made that PowerPoint again.
And you already had one.
Yeah.
And you came up with the same activities the second time with zero recognition that you'd done them before.
Yep. I hear you. I hear you.
Sometimes I look at ones that I made during the pandemic, like just PowerPoints for my classes I teach, and I'm like, wait, did I do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like this is the first time I've seen it.
Well, all right, let's get rolling for today. So, yes, it's great to see folks back who were here yesterday. And we do have some new folks joining us today, so you'll have to endure something of a reintroduction of our presenters today. So if you'll just excuse me on that. And I also have to, of course, always include a word from our sponsor and sponsors. So I will start with that. On behalf of the College of New Jersey and Megan Gordon and Leanna Pachera's Office of Offsite Graduate Programs and Dr. Wu's professional development grant, which is funded by the United States Department of Education. I would like to welcome you both, Dr. Pomerantz and Dr. Box, for coming today. Dr. Box and Dr. Pomerantz are faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Educational Linguistics Program, where they have been preparing teachers for service in language education for really quite some time. And I have firsthand experience of just how incredible they are at their work down there at UPenn. And they also come in capacity as school and higher education consultants with their organization called Multilingual Works, where they collaborate with schools and institutions of higher education like they are today, both domestically and internationally like they are today, to work with folks in the intersection between education and language. And so we had a wonderful workshop yesterday on reading, and today I believe we are moving to interaction. And so at this point, I would like to please turn the workshop over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Nice to see some of you again from yesterday and some new faces today. Welcome. As Tim mentioned, I'm Catherine and I'm here with my colleague Anne. And today we're going to be talking about fostering engagement in the classroom. So Tim, thank you for having us. And would you like to put the link to our presentation? Do you have that? Okay.
I do. Let me put that in the chat, and we would strongly encourage you to go to that link and download the slides, because we are going to start with some video analysis today, and the links to the videos are on the slides.
Yes.
So if anyone who is on here could give us a thumbs up or a nod, or just let us know if you can access the slides, that would be okay. Great. Some
Excellent.
positive feedback. Thank you. I appreciate it. As my
So-
kids having a little bit of pandemic vibe as we're here on the Zoom screen. So thank you for giving us a few
I'm
signs.
going to share screen. Although you have the link so you can download it yourself, I'll share the screen for others. There we are. Okay, is that large enough for everybody to see? Yeah, okay, great. So today, as I said, our topic is teacher talk in secondary classrooms. We're going to talk a bit about fostering engagement with a specific attention to our multilingual learners in the classroom. So what we'd like to do is to begin with something that you'll notice a repeat if you were here yesterday. We just want to get a sense of who's here. Many of you are coming to us as New Jersey teachers. Some of you are teachers in training, and some of you are coming from other parts of the world. So if you could just take a moment to put in the chat your name, where do you teach if you're teaching? And if you are teaching, what grades do you teach? If you are training to be a teacher, perhaps what areas are you training in and where do you project to be teaching? So we'll give you a moment to do that.
See a lot of high school teachers coming. Oh, now I see some younger. Nice. Lots of neighbors to the north of us in Philadelphia.
Of course, today they're to the extreme north of us.
Yes, that is true.
Anne and I, as we told people yesterday, are both working on a project in Chile, but we're in two different cities. We're working at the same university. Anne's at our satellite campus, and I'm at the main campus. So we are quite far away from each other, even though we are ostensibly in the same place.
Yeah, we are like 9 hours apart. In fact, when I look at all of the schools where you all teach, you all are when we're in Philadelphia, you're way geographically closer to us than Catherine and I are in Chile. We are, I think, 10 hours apart by car.
Yes.
So it's kind of crazy.
Excellent.
So welcome everybody, and welcome back to those of you who were with us yesterday.
Okay. So What we're going to be doing today, we're going to first actually begin with a video analysis that's going to get us going. So the interactive part is going to be right from the start. We're going to give you a chance to view videos individually, and then we're going to put you in groups to work on them and share. So this is an interactive workshop. We're a large group, but you will be working in small groups for a good part of the workshop. Then we're going to do some mini lectures, one of them to talk about comprehensible input and what it is. And then we're going to talk about the use of comprehensible input, both in teacher-fronted talk, specifically when giving instructions and telling students what to do. Because oftentimes when multilingual learners are not engaged, one of the main challenges that they have designated is that they are not always sure what to do when they're put into either groups or individual work situations. And so we're going to talk about making instructions comprehensible. We're also going to look at the role of input in teacher-student interaction, and also look at what kinds of output our students can produce when input is made comprehensible. And then finally, we're going to talk about the importance of informally monitoring that your students are both understanding the concepts you're introducing and also understanding the language you're using to enact what's going on in the classroom through the use of comprehension checks. We do anticipate a short break approximately halfway through, so we've got a lot to do. So we'll get started right away. So the first thing we're going to do, as mentioned, is we're going to actually have you look at some videos. You will see two videos in math and in science that are naturally occurring data, meaning that these were real classrooms where permission had been given to film, that we're not specifically looking at language use in the classroom. So we're really getting something that is quite authentic without any performative aspect to it. The third clip is actually looking at how to work with L's. So there is some particular attention being paid to the teacher talk. So this gives us a nice point of comparison, because you'll see things a little bit differently in video clip number 3 than what you'll see in 1 and 2. And so that'll give you a nice point of comparison when you're working with your groups. You'll also note that video clip 3 is working with learners that are slightly younger, because oftentimes teacher talk and calibrating our talk is something that is of focus when training elementary school teachers, not as much when you're in your content areas of expertise as secondary teachers. So it's not surprising that the third clip comes from younger learners.
Actually, I think, can I interrupt, Catherine? I think the third clip, they're late middle school, so they're not that much younger.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not that much younger. I also want to just note on the slides, you're not watching the whole clip, so pay attention before you click on it, note at what minute you should start watching.
Yeah. So as you'll see, it's approximately 2 to 3 minutes per video. So the prompts here on your left, what do you think the teacher is trying to do in each one of the clips that you see? How is language being used to talk and interact with students? And anything else you might notice, or any points of comparison and contrast that you might see. So we're going to give you about 15 minutes to download and watch the clips. You actually won't have to download them. You can just click right through, and then we'll put you into groups and have you work on them after you viewed them.
So I think just for, sake of organization, we'll ask you to, so it's now 3:15. So we'll ask you to go watch the videos, watch them more than once if you'd like, take some notes, and then come back at 3:30. We'll rejoin here, and then we'll put you in small groups to talk about the videos. And if anyone has any questions, Catherine and I will stay in the main room and help you to access videos or anything else. So
Okay, so
to get
back
started.
here at 3:30, and we'll be here to troubleshoot any issues you might have.
There's a request to please repost the link to the slides.
Yep, here you go.
I see people are having trouble with accessing the second video. I'll try once again to put it in the chat, but if we do have trouble with video number 2, we can always just compare and contrast 1 and 3 because 1 and 2 have quite similar elements to them. But let me go check on that and see if I can fix it. Also, can we post the links again? Okay, thank you, Anne. Okay, it looks like there are people that are saying that it is accessible, but it's a little box that needs to be enlarged. I'll just double check that to make sure, but that sounds right to me. Thank you, everybody.
Hello. Are the groups in the breakout room?
Not yet. We're actually viewing videos right now individually, and in about 5 minutes, we're going to put you into breakout rooms.
Okay, I'm a few minutes late. Where do I access the videos?
It is in our chat. Do you see anything in the chat right now?
Okay, I'm actually using my iPad, so let's see. I'm not seeing the chat option. 1 minute.
Okay.
Oh, here it is. Okay, I see it.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you can enlarge the small box on your left. Normally, at least on my computer, I could to make it larger. But since we're listening to the audio and we're thinking about language, even if it's small, you'll still probably be able to get the gist. But I would recommend trying clicking the feature that allows you to enlarge the picture. Okay, it's 3:30, so let's come back together. And I am going to open the breakout rooms. For those of you that are that arrived a little bit later, I'll assign you as soon as I open them because I can't see who's going and who's not until I open them. So I'm going to open them now, and then I'll assign anybody that has not yet been assigned to a room. We'll come back at 3:45. Is that good, Anne?
Yep, 3:45 is good. Now we're a lot of people. So Catherine, would you mind sharing your screen? Let's just review what we'd like you to do in the breakout room.
Absolutely. Let me share my screen. Just move that over. Okay. Here we are. So what we'd like you to do in your groups is to have somebody take notes and then also nominate a reporter for when we do a group share. We're going to ask one person from each group to share. And what we're going to be looking at is, what is the teacher trying to do? What do you notice about each teacher's talk? And how do the teachers interact with the students? And then specifically to kind of move us into the next portion, do you notice the teacher doing anything specific to make what she is saying more comprehensible or understandable to the students? And if so, to give examples. Okay, so those are our discussion questions to guide you, and then we will have a share out in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing and open the breakout rooms. Okay. Okay. And we should have everybody at this point received an invitation.
Which your spokesperson.
Hi.
Hi, so who's your designated spokesperson for the first group?
I'll do it.
Great, thank you.
We noticed that between the first and the second one, there didn't seem to be as much engagement with anybody who might have a language barrier, whether it be large or small. They seem to be going, both of them seem to be going really quickly, although the second teacher also wrote everything down, which did make it better. somewhat for the students, and then she told them they'd be able to also use that anchor chart as part of the test, as notes for part of the test, which I thought was really great. The third teacher, though, we thought was really doing a wonderful job, because she actually even spoke, I believe it was Spanish, to her class at some point, and kept telling them, come on, give it to me in our language. Tell me what you really want to say. Let me know. So she was very, I guess I want to say, upbeat about it and inclusive.
Yeah, those are some great observations. One of the things that I noted in that second video, it is wonderful that they're allowed to use the anchor chart. The way that the teacher phrases it, though, she says something like, what is it that I said you'd be able to do with the paper that you'd be able to do? And I thought to myself, so what she's saying is you can use this paper for the exam. But I wondered, if you were an English language learner, how easy it would be to understand the phrasing of a question in that way,
Yes.
which she tended to do a lot, right? So yeah, some of the great pedagogy could be improved even further by paying more mind to the words you're using to express this, right? And it does say, I'm not sure if it was when I gave you the link, if it was linked to the main page, there are English language learners in that class. And so putting ourselves in those shoes, it could have been a little bit hard to follow some of the great ideas and the scaffold she was giving them.
Yeah.
So
now,
yeah.
were there any English language learners in the first video?
It's not explicitly stated.
Okay.
Exactly. It's not clear. It's that video comes from a collection of videos about exemplary math teaching. So it's
Okay.
not stated, and it's about the topic, I think, is math conversations and engaging students in talk about math. So it's interesting to think that exemplary conversations don't include any differentiation for English learners, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, I
something
thought that would have been
about.
very hard to understand if you didn't speak English. And then
Yeah.
every time we talked about how every time she interrupted a student, she apologized and said, I'm sorry I interrupted. But I think that makes it even harder for somebody who doesn't speak English if the person who is trying to explain it gets interrupted constantly.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is notable about that collection of videos is and I look at that as a teacher. I think there's a lot of exemplary stuff the teacher is doing in that interactive math class.
Absolutely.
And so it's not at all a critique of one particular person, but it is notable that exemplary practices often are not taking into account students that make up a significant proportion of our classroom, right? And so we were thinking about how helpful it would be for teachers to learn how to fine tune their practices even more to make it inclusive, not just for students to engage, and bring their ideas in, but also so that English learners can express those ideas as well. So thank you very much, room 1.
Thank you.
Room 2, I'm going to call this Katie's room. I see Katie, Kylie, Marianne, and Susanna.
Hi, I'll be speaking for group 2.
Thank you.
Yes, we had a lot of similar thoughts as the first group. In the first video, it was very fast paced. We did notice that she interrupted a lot. The teacher was using a lot of advanced vocabulary and not really doing much to break it down for the students. And just choice of words, for example, like let's attack this problem. For an English language learner, they may not understand what that means or have the wrong definition of attack. The second video, we saw that the teacher was rewording and repeating what the student said as she was writing it down, which we thought was good. Also using the anchor chart for the test. And when she reworded a question, she circled back to the student who had trouble with it, which I think her name was Daisy. She circled back to her to make sure that she understood what she didn't initially. And then in video 3, we liked that it was bilingual. Thought that was a huge help for the students. She was encouraging the use of vocabulary. She was very animated, using sentence stems in the way she was speaking and using her body, like especially at the end, to try to get them to say the word leaves. So we thought that that was a good video, and she did a nice job.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly video 3 was specifically looking at language use with language learners. So there's a lot of really good stuff in it. Video 2, I think, makes a good point. She's teaching a lot of students, and she really does have command and allows different students to participate. And she does also use a lot of repetition of the words. She says polymer over and over again, which is a robust way to make technical vocabulary salient to language learners, which I thought was great as well. Okay, let's hear from at least one more group. I have Mariam's group next.
Hi, yes, group 3.
Mm-hmm.
So again, echoing what the other 2 groups said, we also felt with group 1 that in the beginning, she did try to collect some data and collecting feedback. We also noticed, I mean, we felt she came across as quite rude, that there was a point where she was rolling her eyes and interrupting. And she was also using slang when she was talking to the kids, like when she said, yo, like who's next, which may not, be as appropriate in a classroom. So I'm also a little surprised that it's an exemplary video, because we didn't really feel that way. But for video 3, we liked it a lot. One of our group commented that it was trans-languaging when she was using the different languages. She was reinforcing what the community helper is. She spoke slowly, and she also gave examples used in students' names so they could own the word as well and see it sort of practically in their classroom. It wasn't an abstract thing. So using like so-and-so is our community, I think it was pencil helper. I forgot what it was.
Yeah, that was the first video with the younger students, right?
Yes. And then one of our team also noticed that that there was a girl from Guatemala, and she was going who spoke a different dialect of Spanish, and so she said she was going to do a home survey so that she could connect with her more. So we felt she really sort of went above and beyond.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I agree that translanguaging can be really powerful in the classroom. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Sometimes also there's a sense that in order to translanguage, you need to speak the other languages of the students. And certainly you have to have a curiosity about other languages, but as you note in some of that, the teachers aren't necessarily fluent, right? And I can speak from personal experience because I've been here in Chile. I am not bilingual. Anne is. I'm bilingual, but not with Spanish. And I have been learning Spanish as I've been teaching. I teach in English, but oftentimes the students that don't feel comfortable speaking in English will speak in Spanish to me, and I have enough knowledge that I can usually get the gist. And then if I don't understand, somebody else will translate it into English for me. And we've really built a rapport by doing that, because then when I learn a word, I try to repeat it after the people in my class, and they encourage me and I encourage them. And so that is something that can be used whether or not you yourselves are comfortable with the language. So that's really something that I think sometimes comes through in those videos.
I wanted to make another comment about, so video 3, again, like Catherine said, is it comes from a book called Core Practices for Teaching Multilingual Learners. And there are actually 6 videos, I think, in the series. The one that we asked you to watch there are 3, I think, classroom clips in it. The one with the community helpers is first. And then the second one is older kids, and the teacher is talking about seed germination and plants, and she's kind of explaining the directions for an activity. In both those cases, the teacher does use quite a bit of the student's home language, in this case, Spanish, but it is interesting to see the ways in which the teacher uses it as kind of a fluid part. She's not translating, right? It's not that the kids are saying one word and then she's translating it and then we're coming back. It's all part of kind of the same conversation, right? And she's being very, she's using all the linguistic resources she has. Both teachers are. All the resources they have, they're clearly second language users of Spanish, both of them. But they're comfortable, and they're comfortable using what they have with the students. And I think that is a huge piece of what's happening there, is just the comfort level, right? Let's see.
Yep. In the 2-minute clip, the Spanish was used once.
No, she uses it more than once. Maybe some of us watch different pieces of video 3. In video 3, the teacher goes back and forth. She uses quite, in the clip we watched of the growth cycle, there are a number of different moments where she uses Spanish. Most of it is in very short bursts though. 1 word, 2 words, maybe a phrase. It's not they're not extended turns at talk. So it's not like they explain the growth cycle or what the instructions are, and then she re-explains it in Spanish. It's all integrated in. Yep, she does. She uses one person wrote here, key phrases, exactly. Dos veces, she wants to know, so minúscula, mayúscula, she wants to know what capital letters, punto finales, right, periods. So she kind of intersperses things. We imagine these are things that her class talks about. I would encourage you then, if because this is hard to talk and look at the chat at the same time. Watch it again and watch what she does. The video links are in the slides. So if you're worried about where did the video links go, I'm going to put them in the chat again. They're in the slides. You can watch them at any time. You can also, the book is called Core Practices. Or you know what, I need to go find the book. I have it on my desk over here. It's called something like Core Practices for Multilingual Learners. And so there's a collection of 6 videos.
And I too got confused with the timestamp. So some people that may have seen something different might have watched a different clip, because I watched the community helpers at first. So that also could be it, where she does use a bit less Spanish with the community.
The community helpers is a little less than the other one. Okay, so why don't we
I'll answer the question.
What was that? Oh, the link. It's actually the same link. The link that
the 6 videos are part of a book. They cut the
collection.
collection.
But it's the same video link, like the same link we gave you takes you to all 6. So you can see them all there. It takes you to a page and then you have to scroll through to see them. All right, so why don't we, I'm gonna share screen. Whoops, oh, Catherine's gonna share screen. Do you wanna share it?
Yep, that's fine.
All right. Okay. So one of the things that this conversation kind of leads us to is a concept that those of you who have worked as English language teachers or language educators are probably familiar with, which is the idea of comprehensible input. And comprehensible input was a term that was first proposed by Stephen Krashen and Terrell in '83 as part of a theory of second language acquisition. The concept has since been challenged and extended within second language research, but it's still an important concept. And so, Catherine, if you could go to the next slide. Comprehensible input basically refers to all of the kind of meaningful language that language learners are exposed to in their classrooms and in their communities. So things that are coming in, right? Things that our students are receiving. And research suggests that making input comprehensible or more easily understood by learners is a key factor in additional language development. Now, in early theories of second language acquisition, like in the 80s and 90s, there was lots of talk, well, what exactly is like the dividing line between comprehensible input versus not comprehensible input? There were theories put forth that said comprehensible input is sufficient for language learning. Other people said, no, you need more than comprehensible input. And while researchers have kind of gone back and forth about what the precise role of comprehensible input might be in second language learning or additional language learning, I think the key point here is that as language educators, the more we can do to make what we're saying, what the language of the classroom is saying, the more we can enhance that and make it accessible to learners, the better. So teachers then, I think the big takeaway here is that they can play a strong role in supporting learners' language development by attending to, as you all noted in your observations of those videos, by attending to how they use language in the classroom and how they use language in their interactions with learners, right? So teachers have a role to play here in helping to make input comprehensible. If we turn a minute to what more modern iterations of second language research tell us, they say that language learning begins at the micro level of social activity. And by micro level, they mean that interactional level. They mean that level in which people are directly engaged with language, either listening to it, reading it. And they argue that through L2 learners or second language learners, repeated experiences in regularly occurring and recurring contexts of use. So through constant exposure and repetition, right? Through constant engagement in the same kinds of interactions that are with other people, right? People start to learn language. So we know from research that there's something to be said about the language use that you're engaged with. It has to happen over and over again. It has to be iterative. You need something there. It can't just be like a one and done, right? We've got to do a lot of repetition. We've got to do a lot of engagement. And so that kind of helps us to think about what would make input comprehensible. One of the things that makes it comprehensible is repetition. And the repetition, not just of individual words, but of longer stretches of text that are part of bigger social activities like classroom routines and things like that. So if you go forward, so what we know is that in these interactions, learners start to engage in this process of sense making, and they start to make connections between bits of language, right? Kind of things they hear and see in the classroom, and the meanings of those bits of language and what those bits of language might mean in specific contexts. So I'll give you an example. When my niece is 7, and when she was about 2.5 years old, she came to visit, and she was staying with my parents, and I was there visiting, and I got up to leave and go back to my house, and I said to her name's Sasha, I said, "Bye, Sasha." And she looked at me and she said, "Have a nice weekend." And we all started to laugh because it was Monday. So what happened there? Sasha learned that there are bits of language, right, that people use to say goodbye. So she recognized that we were in the saying goodbye part of the interaction. And she listened to the people around her, and she realized that sometimes when people say goodbye, they say goodbye. Sometimes they say see you later. And sometimes they use this awesome phrase, "Have a nice weekend." And so she trotted that out. She got lots of laughs and smiles. She looked pretty proud of herself right after that. And we all ended up with a great story, right? Now that's an example from first language learning, right? She's a first language speaker of English, but it illustrates the kind of sense making that's happening when people are learning language, particularly in naturalistic contexts. They're noting these relationships between social situations, like it's time for your aunt to say goodbye, and they're noting what bits of language go with those situations, they're testing them out, and they're seeing what happens when people use those bits of information. And so as teachers, right, we can play a big role in making those form meaning connections more salient, more obvious, and more comprehensible to learners. We can help kind of push them to focus on those kinds of connections, but also make what's happening much more understandable, right? By trying to augment what we're saying, what we're doing, in ways that make it more comprehensible. So if we go to the next slide, we know pollination tells us that comprehensible input happens when most of what the learners are listening to or reading is already familiar. So input's more comprehensible if you have a sense of what's already happening, right? When learners are interested in what's going on and they want to understand it, right? When they've got some skin in the game, when they want to know what's happening. And when learners can gain some knowledge of the unknown language items through context clues and background knowledge. So, you know, what can we connect to, right? It's not, if everything is not understandable, it's going to be really tough. So what pieces of the input can we connect to? What might be already known information? What might be known words? And then how can we build on that? And finally, when there are large quantities of input, that helps as well, especially input that repeats over and over and over again. And so if we go to the next slide, we know, and you've already mentioned a lot of these today in your analysis of the video, there are lots of different strategies for making input comprehensible. Slowing down, right? Repeating. Those are two really, really important strategies. And, you know, especially, I know this as a teacher, you never have enough time, right? And so I know for me, I'm always like looking at my watch and thinking, okay, do I race through the next thing or do I hold it for the next lesson? And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized it's better to hold it for the next lesson. Kebra wrote, yeah, we mentioned that in our group. We need to allow for processing, slower speed. You got to really slow down if you have English learners. And you know what? Slowing down is good for everybody. Repetition's good for everybody. We all tune out. We're all distracted. Slower speech rate, repetition, very helpful.
And just to chime in as well, I think with content teachers that haven't specifically received training working with English learners, slowing down talk is probably one of the hardest things to become cognizant of. I know if you are training specifically in TESOL or have received professional development, that's something that we talk about explicitly, not as much when we're working, when we're training content teachers. And I think that is something that is one of the first things that we often suggest people to do is try to pay attention to the speed of talk, because we saw with both teachers, the first two teachers in our clips, how fast they were talking. And again, saying things like, what did I tell you could do with this that you'll be able to do, right? And kind of delivering that complex phrase in a rapid fire fashion for something that was actually simple and helpful. So just raising that awareness can go a long way.
Yeah, and those of you who are in positions where maybe you're the ESOL teacher and you're working with colleagues, if anyone asks you for advice, you know, what can they do? One of the things they can do is slow down and repeat. Yes, and it's also from the chat, helpful learning with students with learning differences. Yes. I think honestly, in this world is so complex and so fast paced, slowing down and repeating is pretty much always helpful. It's the advice you get also if you're doing any public speaking. The advice is almost always slow down, repeat your key points, which gets us to 3, highlighting keywords and concepts. We saw a lot of that in video 2 with the teacher writing on the board. We saw it a lot in video 3. Trying to not overwhelm learners with the input and highlighting what keywords matter, right? Tim writes here, speaking in thought groups, right? So not stopping after each word, but kind of the chunk. Putting students with a buddy can help to process as well, for sure.
Helps with repetition and highlighting.
Yep, definitely. Translation and translanguaging are both helpful. They're slightly different. Translation is usually, you know, if I say, see you legal, right? So I repeat exactly what I previously said, but in a new language, right? That would be translation. Translanguaging is a little more seamless. You don't necessarily repeat what you just said in a new language. You sort of continue on inserting words and phrases to your ability throughout your talk. Circumlocution is when you don't know a word, right? Or you're trying to kind of explain a concept, right? It's, we talk about it in language teaching. If you don't know a word, how do you say it? So I'm here in Chile, very often I come to words I don't know in Spanish, or the word here in Chile is different than a word I know. So I might ask some questions about it. Circumlocution as a way of defining terms in teacher talk is really helpful. So saying a concept, defining it. Teacher 2 did a lot of that with the polymers and the monomers.
I have an
She was
example
working-
from today in my
Okay,
experience.
go ahead.
Today. Well, because I am learning Duolingo Spanish, and so I know the word for strawberry is fresa. So I asked for, because there's a lot of fresh fruit juice here. So I asked for strawberry juice, and fresa is not the word for strawberry. So then I was like, you know, so I said in Spanish as best I could, that little red fruit.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, frutilla. So I guess in Chile and in Argentina, it's frutilla. Not
Frutilla.
fresa.
Mhm. I learned that
Um,
when I was here too.
But by saying that little red fruit that we
Mhm.
often make with juice was circumlocution, and it worked.
Exactly.
I got
Exactly.
yeah,
And
it
it's
was
something
delicious.
we're doing a lot as teachers. We often think of that as defining words, right? But circumlocution is helpful for, I think one of you called out the first teacher for saying, let's attack the problem. Circumlocution might be, let's attack the problem. You know, let's look at the problem step by step and go through it. That would be kind of circumlocution there, trying to explain what you mean by attack, right? And in that way, trying to help learners to make connections between that more colloquial phrase, attack the problem, with what action it refers to. Signposting, like we do in writing. First, we're going to talk about this, second, third, fourth, right? So signposting, yesterday, usually with a gesture, yesterday we talked about this, tomorrow we'll talk about that. Much like review and preview, giving examples. Open retrieval refers to while you're talking, you kind of leave some blank spaces and try to get the students to sort of fill in what you're saying, right? The third teacher did that in her talk about the seeds and the direction. She was like, okay, now what do you do next? Okay, now what? Right, you do this. So it's a little more, you make your talk a little more collaborative. And then restructuring refers to, as you're talking, you say it one way, then you say it another way. It's like rephrasing, but you use a different structure. Similar to summarizing when you kind of hit key points. These are just some strategies for making input comprehensible. They're not all. Tim writes here, I think one of the challenges of input-based approaches is thinking about when and how to hold kids accountable for the learning that might come out of these techniques. Otherwise, the input just keeps moving on and the kid's not in agreement or understanding without knowing how to use it. Tim, you've read our minds, because this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later in the workshop, is making input comprehensible has to be paired with explicit attention to checking understanding and pushing for output, because the default answer is to nod. And I think we're all really good at pretending that we're engaged and understanding what's going on, even when we're not. And that can be a real self-defense mechanism, particularly when you're new to a language. I'm going to stop here and ask if there are any more any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat, or feel free to unmute if you'd like to say something.
Can you briefly just review signposting one more time? I don't want to confuse it with gesturing. So can you just clarify? Thanks.
Sure. Signposting is when you use what are sometimes called discourse markers. Sometimes they're called signposts to mark your talks. So maybe you use words like first, second, and third in order to organize what you're saying. Another signpost is to use time markers, like yesterday we did this, today we are doing this, tomorrow we're doing a third thing. So numerical order, time frame, those are both very common signposts. In writing, we often use things like first, moreover, subsequently, finally. Those are signposts as well.
Okay, is it appropriate to gesture while doing those things?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of comprehensible input, you need to use multiple channels simultaneously. The real key, and what researchers tell us about gesture, is to make sure, so I'm a big hand talker, right? I don't know if you can see this on the screen. But I've come to understand that I need to simplify my gestures a little and be more consistent with them, so that when I'm using them, for example, to signpost like first, second, third, right? That people are really paying attention to the gestures as mattering, rather than me sort of waving my hands around all the time when I'm talking.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's see. Are there other questions here? The question about nodding. Just looking at it. Yeah, I think the real case is that very often we use nodding as, we take nodding to be a sign of, yes, I understand, but nodding has other meanings too. Nodding can mean I'm listening, or nodding can mean I'm pretending to listen to you. So that's what I do to my own children who are teenagers. They tell me things and I just nod my head like I'm pretending, like I'm listening. Right? It takes time to understand. And, you know, we were saying it's important to pair, or I was saying it's important to pair comprehensible input with comprehension checks, but it's also important to attend to people's emotions and not put people on the spot immediately. Because then they really will check out of your class. So, and Kathy wrote, and in some languages, nodding means no, exactly. And sometimes there are different head gestures, right? Side to side, tipping your head up. So we want to be careful trying to understand all of the body language that's going on in our class, particularly when it's a multilingual, multicultural space. The thing I always tell teachers is, whenever you think you're 100% sure that you know what's going on in your classroom, that's when you're probably wrong. If you're a little bit confused and you're not sure, that's a good space, because you're still open to thinking about other interpretations. Oh, question here. Would using a traffic light system, red, yellow, green, to check for understanding work? Yes, if your students feel comfortable giving you reds and yellows. And yes, if they're truthful, or I shouldn't say truthful, sincere in their greens. Because sometimes you think you know what's going on, so you give a green light, but then 10 seconds later, you're like, oh, wait, I don't know what's going on. So, you know, I think it's very moment by moment, but what really, for me as an educator, what I think about is, what can I do in this class that will help me to understand how well my students are making sense of what I'm saying? I'm going to use as many resources as I can And I'm going to pause a lot and check for understanding in different ways. And we'll talk about some of those ways later in the workshop.
Yeah. So this might actually be a good time to take the short break we were discussing.
Yeah. Yes.
It would take us actually, if we did a short, about 7-minute break and come back at 4:30. We are going to actually do exactly what Anne was talking about. We're going to be discussing checking for understanding a little bit later on in the second half of the workshop. We're also going to be looking at direction giving, which, as I had mentioned, is an important part of comprehensible input, as well as questioning patterns.
And Marina wrote here, it's important to know which gestures and signs are acceptable and which are not in various cultures. Yeah, we do need some sense of that and some sense of making sure that our gestures aren't disruptive, right? Kind of the smooth flow of interaction matters too. These are all really critical points.
And so really from the first half of the workshop, one of the takeaways is just how much our talk matters, right? And how much being aware of what we're saying and how we're saying it is a crucial part in multilingual learners development, but also good for all students. And many of you were chiming in that this is helpful for all students. And so often the strategies that we offer certainly are useful to everybody in the class.
So why don't we take a break for till 4:30, and when we come back, I think Tim might have a public service announcement for us too. So maybe we'll do that when we come back at 4:30. So take a break, stretch your legs, and we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Okay. Share screen again. I believe we have another clip for you to view. This one's a little bit shorter.
Do we want to, Catherine, does Tim?
Oh,
maybe
yes,
wanna
Tim's
make his
public service
announcement?
announcement. I'm sorry, I got too excited. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you. Okay, so just real quick, one of the benefits and perks of attending these workshops, of course, is professional development hours through the College of New Jersey. I am going to share a link in the chat in a moment. And what I'll ask you to do is just to open up a separate window in your browser to complete the form. The form is asking, in addition to your email address and the name as you wish to have it on your certificate, which we will email to you. Also, just a little bit of feedback about the workshop. So I'm actually going to ask you to not fill it out until we get towards the end of the workshop. The form is currently switched off for receiving responses, but if you could please just open the link and get it loaded up in your browser. I'll have it available for receiving responses in the last 15 minutes of our workshop today. And of course, we do have our workshops tomorrow and on Wednesday on vocabulary in the content classrooms, and on, sorry, not Wednesday, on Tuesday, or today's Monday. Which
Yes.
hemisphere am I in? All right. So yes, Tuesday and Wednesday. So we've got vocabulary in the content classrooms tomorrow. And we've got language objectives for our final workshop of the series this year on Wednesday. So we hope to see you for that. The link for joining those is exactly the same as joining this today. And if you've got any friends that want to join along, please invite them and share the link with them. That would be great. So as I say, I'll open up the link for receiving responses at about 5:15 or so, and you can fill out the form. But if you could just get it in your browser now, that would be great. And that's all I have to say for public service.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Okay, so if you are having trouble with our slide deck, because it's not opening up, yes, let me put my email in the chat and let me know, send me a reminder email and I will email them to you.
Here, I'm gonna put it again. Whoops, that's the wrong one. I can put the link in there too. Also, I put in the chat during the break the name of the book that goes with video 3 that we watched. So it's called Core Practices for Teaching Multilingual Students. And it's from Teachers College Press.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, we have another video for you to analyze. This is, I think, the last one of the day. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, let me just, okay, so what we're going to have you do here is actually a little bit of levity on the topic. We have a video actually from one of my favorites, Monty Python, The Meaning of Life. And this is a video of John Cleese, who was teaching and giving instructions. And so you'll want to watch this very short clip. It's less than a minute. And see when you are in your groups, if you are able to figure out what exactly the teacher is asking the students to do. And what we're going to have you do is actually, if you can, rewrite the instructions, thinking about how you could make these instructions comprehensible using some of the input strategies, comprehensible input strategies that we mentioned in the previous slide. And then we'll have a chance to at least ask some of the groups to share their instructions. So this one will be a humorous but also useful activity for you. So again, the YouTube clip is right here. It's very short, and you'll rewrite the instructions using and saying, you know, how would you make the input more comprehensible? So with that said, I'm going to stop share and I'm going to open up the rooms again. You're going to be in the same breakout rooms that you were in last time. And we'll give you about 10 minutes, 15 minutes total in the group to watch the clip and work on rewriting the instructions together as a group. So once again, designate somebody who will be able to share if your group is called upon. I will assign everybody who is unassigned once people join the groups. Then I'll be able to assign people to rooms. Let's see here. Let's see if I can do that now. Here we go. Who is supposed to be in group 5? Let me figure this. Let's see. Okay. Let me see if I can move you into group 5. Okay. Let's see here. Sorry, this takes a little bit longer than you'd think. Okay, 12, 13. What, are you in a group right now, Anne? Anne Grant?
No.
Okay, you're not showing up as unassigned. That's really strange. I
I
can't
was
find.
supposed to be in group 5, but I clicked out of it before I could get there.
Oh, I see what you mean. You're okay. Got it. Let me see. Oh, all right. I'm gonna move you out of group 5, but then I'm gonna move you back in. So you're
Okay.
gonna be. I put you in group 1, but now I'm gonna move you back to group 5. There we go. Hopefully that worked.
Okay, let's see. We have another one. So Maya, also, we have a few
Okay.
people. Were
So Maya group 13. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to move you into group 1 for just a moment and then move you back to group 13. Okay, let's see if that worked.
Susan and Julie.
Oh, she joined the group. Okay, well, that's okay. Okay, Susan, what group were you in before?
Group 10.
Group 10. Let me see if I can get you back there. Okay, and Julie? Or Julia? Oh, okay. And Kebra, let me see. Are you, where should you be?
I think Kebra's in room 11. Kebra should
Yeah,
be.
I'm gonna try to move her out and back in if that's possible. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna move you back to group 11, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Catherine, I'm looking at our plan. We have the lecture on IRE. and then an application activity, and then comprehension checks, but I don't think we have time for all of that.
I
right?
agree. Do you want to go to let's go to comprehension checks right away, because that has come up already.
Oh, I was gonna say we could do IRE and skip the middle application activity and go straight
Oh.
into comprehension check. Why don't we do that? And then comprehension check's the last thing we do.
Okay, that's fine as well.
Let's
We'll
just
just
skip,
skip the
let's skip the return to videos from first activity.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yep, it does. I'll leave it in there just in case, but I'll note slide 21.
Okay. Yeah, just leave it there and then, oh, did we lose Samaya here? I don't know what happened to Kebra.
Yeah. Let me see where I can.
Where was Samaya?
Oh, you didn't move. Okay. I think what happened was because you actually joined the group, it wound up not letting me move you. Let me see if I can get you. Okay, this should let you go now. Okay, this should work.
There's Samaya. Kebra, are you there? Do you need us to put you in a group?
Okay. I think everybody's back now. That's great. Okay. So let's hear what some of the groups have to say. I know we won't be able to hear from everybody, but I'd love the sense you've made of these of the clip. So let's go to, let me see here. Abby, Kristen, Sadia, and Suhasini.
So we were talking about how like in that clip it was like obviously supposed to be humorous, but he was really like talking himself like in circles, at like every like half thought he said, he would like trail off with ifs and ifs and if this, but if you did this, but if you did this. It was like kind of like impossible for even like a native speaker to follow along. Like I really did have to watch it like 2 or 3 times to actually understand. We were saying that like if like at first he like set the expectations by using that word we talked about before, circumlocution, I think, just being like, okay, first you do this, second you do this with like the modeling and the hand signals, and then after that go off like into all those ifs, into all the ifs. Like after he like explained what he wanted, like okay, now raise your hand if your brother is doing this, to actually like explain it then, instead of like cutting himself off with all those strange thoughts.
Yeah, what you're describing there, Kristen, is signposting actually, right? That's the like kind of
signposting, sorry.
Second, yeah, no, but that's the spirit of it is still there, right? So, and so many of you are saying in the chat, right? We had to take notes, and even then, it was hard to follow. And we can see just how easy it is to tune out when you're given multi-step directions and you're lost at step 1. It's really easy to just kind of tune out the rest of it. And then of course you put the students in groups, and you only know that a group or two doesn't know what to do when you go around and monitor the groups, and you see, oh, this group wasn't even sure what it is they're supposed to be doing. And so of course, an easy way to disengage is when you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, right? So so I can see some of you tried to take notes, some of you needed visuals, a flow chart, I agree. And nobody can do a delivery like John Cleese, right? So it was something that was really difficult to do, but I agree, signposting and visuals or gestures would be really helpful. Room 5, this is Kathy's group. Hey, Kathy.
Hi there, this is Tiffany. So, all right, my goodness. I think we figured out what he was asking them to do, but we're not even entirely sure. I feel like somewhere in there, and it wasn't even the first thing that they said was write a letter home. That's what I thought, but he constantly was interrupting himself with these qualifiers of, but if this happens, move to step A, and under, a lot of before, after, if it was, I guess the point of it is we're not even entirely sure what they were being asked to do.
So yeah, I agree with you that it was probably something like write a letter home. What kinds of things would you have added to it?
I loved certainly visuals, certainly sequential ordering, some kind of outline, and maybe, first do this. And I loved the previous group's response of, stopping, raise your hand if your brother is doing this. That cohort will follow these instructions. Raise your hand if, every time that he was, kind of qualifying what he was saying, if he could isolate that group and say, these are the alternate instructions for you.
Yes, that would have been super helpful. Everybody getting a haircut, I think, could have been put into a separate group, right? And given those
everybody getting a haircut, sure, and everybody playing the soccer game or the football game. Yes,
they had to move their clothes down a peg or whatever.
Yes.
Kudos to Anne for finding this clip, by the way.
It's something I used to use in my teaching, forgot about, and rediscovered when I was producing the materials for today. But what I love about it is how many times in your classroom have you been giving instructions and you suddenly come up with a number of qualifiers and you realize, like, you start talking, and even though you're well planned, you're like, well, if this, then blah, blah, blah. If that, then this. And, when we listen to it and we're all strong speakers of English, we still have no idea what's going on. So if we think about English learners, how overwhelming something like this would be. That's another way to kind of just think about just the sheer amount of information and no effort to organize it or personalize it or put it in stages that could really, as all of you were saying, those are the things that make input comprehensible.
Right. And it does remind me of that second clip, the science teacher who says that, what is it that I told you that you'd be able to do with it that you'll be able to do? That's something I would say to my children, no problem, because I'm thinking aloud, right? And the spirit of it was there. And so, my kids, if they're listening to me, can follow it. But it starts to sound like John Cleese to somebody if the language isn't as familiar, to kind of put that qualifier in or leave a blank in a part of your, what she really wanted to say is, what can you do with this chart? But that's not exactly what she said, right? And so I think that's a similar situation that people will find themselves in if they're not as familiar with the language. It's easier to be in a position that we're put in when we're faced with John Cleese's directions. That's not always apparent to us when we're speaking a language that we're proficient in. Let's hear from maybe one more group. How about Celia's group?
Hi. Yeah, we were pretty much saying a lot of the same things. It was too fast, could have slowed down. It looked like, actually, when he was explaining it the second time, it looked like he added stuff that he didn't say the first time. Like after you rest and you greet the guest and you report to Mr. Beanie about some signature. So I'm like, whoa, I didn't hear that before. So it was funny, but I guess the main thing is, if you're going to write a letter home and your kid brother's not going to be around later, grab the letter and send them together. I guess that's the gist of it. And apparently haircuts are important. So got that there too. I guess it's a boy thing. The haircuts.
Somebody tell my son, because he doesn't want to get his haircut before school starts.
Yeah. So I think we just watched it so many times that it wasn't that we grouped just as we were getting the breaking out of the breakout rooms. We got that message. So, but it was cute.
Yes, that's for sure. Yes, shout out to all of you teachers that put up with the kids and their greasy hair. Somebody's going to be unlucky this year in my son's school.
I like this comment in the chat. Teaching is like a marriage. One party
Yes.
knows exactly what they mean to say, and the other is clueless about what they're saying, at least in my experience.
Not just in your experience. No.
It is like that. But I mean, that's part of it too, right? As teachers, we have the big picture. We know where we're going most of the time. The kids don't necessarily know, and they don't always trust us to get them there. And so, you know, what are some of the things, as we've been talking about today, to make both those small level of interaction more comprehensible, but also even those bigger things of, you know, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And using, again, like routines, patterns, paying attention to how we're talking.
And another important thing is some of the routines that we do in class, we've been doing for, 20, 30 years. Even though we're all 25, right? We've been doing them for 20 or 30 years. And so they're not new to us. And they're probably not new to a student that may have been in school in an American setting from kindergarten up through whatever grade you're teaching, that, oh yes, doing this first is something that's familiar in this school. But for multilingual learners who are new to perhaps an American education context, perhaps to the school district, and some have interrupted formal education, those routines are not as familiar. And so one of the things that I think is important to remember, especially if you don't work with multilingual learners every year, is for some students, it is brand new. And so being really clear in your instructions every time, that's something I have to remind myself to do, because I've been teaching a course that I'm teaching this fall. I've been teaching it really since like 2006. And so it feels repetitive to me, even though I try to add new material and new readings. And I try to remind myself every year, it's new to the people sitting in my class, right? And keeping that in mind when giving directions as well. All right. Well, I would have loved to have heard from everybody, especially with this clip. But unfortunately, we are such a big group. I am going to share again one more time because we have a little bit of time left, and we're going to talk about let me go back here. Talking about, well, let me first share the strategies for giving instructions, a lot of which we just built together, but we have it on a slide for you as well. There is actually a flow chart that we have here that might have helped John Cleese as well. Is first of all, making sure that the students are paying attention and not trying to begin your directions before you have the attention of everybody. And then the biggest help, I think, is to chunk your instructions into manageable steps. Step by step, what are we doing first? With oftentimes emphasis on the verbs, the actionable things that the students need to do, because for our multilingual learners, the verb is usually the most content heavy part of instructions. Are we supposed to read? Are we supposed to write? Are we supposed to listen? And really putting emphasis on the verb can be very helpful. We talked about pacing before and using visuals. And then another part that we usually find quite helpful, particularly when students are lower level, building their English proficiency, is to model what they should do. This helps all learners, but certainly helps multilingual learners as well. If you can show them what they need to do first, as opposed to telling, sometimes doing the first bit together, whether that's, the first part of the exercise or, the first item on the list, can also be helpful as well. And then, of course, checking to make sure they understand, which we're going to talk more about as we move forward here. Okay, so looking at comprehensible input when interacting with students, this is where we're going to move to the idea that input does not occur in a vacuum, as Tim was pointing out, and as Anne had talked about when we talked about input. Making your input comprehensible is an extraordinarily important piece of interaction in the classroom. But ideally, of course, you want to be getting things back from your students and you want to be hearing their contributions. And so we're now going to be looking at input as it occurs in interactions in whole class or between teachers and groups of students. So what I'd like to do is just let you take a look very quickly at these two spates of interaction. This is research that was done back in the late 70s. One of my favorite pieces that I think I've ever read in when I was in graduate school. And the first thing that this article asks us to do is to consider two different interactions. One of them says, "What time is it, Denise?" Denise answers 2:30, and the other person answers, "Thank you." The other one says, "What time is it, Denise?" Denise answers 2:30, and the other person answers, "Very good." Now I'm going to ask everybody, and feel free to either shout it out or put it in the chat. Which one of these two interactions do you think happened in a classroom? One of them was in a classroom and one of them was on the street. Which one happened in a classroom? Number one or number two?
Two.
Two. Okay, that didn't take much time at all. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Everybody knows. Right? It seems like everybody's putting two. Okay. So let me ask somebody, how do you know it's two? Yes, Patrick.
Well, I feel like in a classroom, usually you're always watching the clock. So instead of just saying thank you for telling you the time, you're kind of now thinking like, oh, this is how much time I have left. Very good. I have this much time left to complete something.
Oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I actually hadn't thought of it. I thought of it very good as in very good, Denise, for telling me the time, right? But that's actually a really interesting way of looking at it. The time pressure makes sense. Mary Ellen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a different interpretation. I just assumed either maybe it was a math class where she was teaching them how to tell time and the student was able to do it. So she praised her, good job, or she's learning how to tell the time in another language and she's praising her. Yeah.
Okay, so because you heard very good, your sense is that it's some sort of like praising her because she said it right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I guess we could consider it kind of like an evaluation of what she said as either right or wrong.
Yes.
For the first one, people were putting in the chat, it's the socially acceptable way, or that it's something that somebody would say in real life. So I guess what we're left with, which is what Mian, the person that did this research many years ago, was thinking about, was that in one case, when you say thank you, you're saying thank you, as many of you pointed out, is appropriate because the person is giving you information that you need, right? So way back when we didn't have cell phones, cast your mind all the way back to that time, we used to actually stop and ask people the time in the street, right? Especially if our watch stopped. That was a thing. Our watch would stop and then we wouldn't know what time it was. And so we were asking information from somebody. So the idea was person A, who Mian specifically didn't name, he didn't say teacher, right? He said A, was a person asking for information from Denise, which is where the thank you comes from. Thank you for giving me that information. Number two, it sounds like the teacher isn't actually asking for the time, perhaps. Although I like that interpretation that maybe the person is, because he says, very good, like very good, this is how much time I have left. That's absolutely possible. But if the teacher says very good in the sense of good job for telling me the time, that means that the teacher actually knew what time it was, right? So what would be the purpose in the teacher asking Denise what time it is, if the teacher knows what time it is? So feel free to either raise your hand, shout it out, type it in the chat.
To check for
Right.
comprehension.
To check for comprehension or feedback, accountability. I see all of this. Lesson in time telling, right? So what Mian discovered was actually that many questions that teachers ask in classrooms are questions that we already know the answer to. And what we're doing is we're trying to figure out if the students know the answer to that question. So our reason for asking questions in the classroom is many times not because we're looking for information from the students, but because we're trying to check to see if the students know what we know. And this discovery made in the 70s, there were a couple of researchers that did this all about the same time in the 70s, was revolutionary in the sense that nobody had ever thought about questions like this before. We all sort of have that instinct that, yeah, of course, teachers ask me questions they know the answer to all the time. They're the expert. But nobody had actually ever put it like that. And the reason why it became really interesting for people who are training working with English learners is because in the 70s, they discovered that this type of classroom talk accounted for about 90% of the questions we ask. So 90% of the questions we ask in the classroom, we already know the answer to. And the reason why that becomes, yes, Socratic method is absolutely part of it to a certain extent. But the reason why this is interesting is because if you actually study the interactional patterns of the way classroom talk works, teachers own at least 2/3 of the interactions with the student. And let me share a screen to show you visually how that plays out. So what happens is this sequential pattern is really common in all classroom talk in, I would say, probably at least Western contexts. I don't know if it extends to contexts all over the world, but certainly in Western contexts. Teacher asks a question, students respond, and then teacher gives evaluation, either right or wrong, or feedback on it, which could be like, oh, you're partly right. Can somebody else help out? You know, things like that. And what that means then is 2 out of every 3 slots of talk are owned by the teacher in 90% of classroom talk, according to that research. And so one of the things that English as an additional or second language teachers have been learning about when studying this is that if students need time to engage with English, if they need to have time to produce output in order to have kind of a complete input-output cycle in the classrooms, then what can we do to either A, try to move away from teacher-heavy talk, where teachers own 2 out of 3 slots, or B, create opportunities for this second slot to be extended? And give students an opportunity to say more than just 2:30 or earthquake or whatever the one-word answer is that oftentimes these IRE patterns are looking for. So to go back to the chat with the Socratic method, I believe that Socratic method can at times create a very elaborate second slot. And so I certainly wouldn't say that, you know, you would want to eliminate or be wary of Socratic method with second language learners. What we want to do is find opportunities to give language learners to speak as much as possible. And so one way would be to extend that response slot. Another way would be to disrupt the whole IRE sequence and ask students questions that maybe we don't know the answer to. So some of the things that we can do is, first of all, help students when you're actually asking a question, right? So for instance, making sure that your terms are understandable to students so that they are primed to give a more elaborate response in that response move. Using gestures, translanguaging, the things that we've talked about so far. But in the R move, some of the things that we can do is to ask open-ended questions. So eliciting a student's opinion is not necessarily something that we know ahead of time. So rather than asking who is the main character, maybe something like, who is your favorite character in this novel? Asking open-ended questions like, how do you say this in your own language? Tell us a little bit about what it means. Will be a way to combine both translanguaging, allow students to bring in what they already know, and also have a chance to produce more in the target language, in this case, English. Other things that you can do is give students time to rehearse and repeat their responses to more open-ended questions. So for instance, if you're doing something like Socratic method or parliamentary method, giving students an opportunity to work on their answers first before they're actually posed that question in front of others. Some things that I'll do with my students, because I have a lot of second language learners in my classroom, is I'll hold like an asynchronous discussion board outside of class. Of course, I'm teaching university, so we only meet once a week. And then 24 hours before I actually hold our in-person session, 2 or 3 students, and I try to pick ones that maybe don't talk as much in class. I contact them and say, hey, I really love what you wrote on the board this week. I'm going to ask you to share it in class. And that gives them time to actually rehearse and repeat their responses. And what I found usually is if I start the semester that way in September, by the time we hit November or December, I usually don't need to do that anymore. Because if they've had 1 or 2 successful goes at sharing their response, they're more likely to do so spontaneously later on in the semester. Other things you can do allow for translanguaging and nonverbal. So if students find themselves stuck, give them a second to either say it in another language and have another student help the translanguaging process, or you, if you're able, using gesture. And then also asking follow-up questions. So rather than stopping with very good or no, that's not quite right, could somebody else help? Maybe say, oh, Hamlet's your favorite character, why? And try to get more of those open-ended answers. Or, could you tell me more about the evidence that, of the causes of the Civil War or something like that? Or asking more elaborate questions on their thinking as they were trying to solve a math problem, things like that. And then finally, another thing that you can do, which is often very helpful for beginners, is to offer them some sentence frames. So if you're going to ask them a question, give them things that they can say to get them going. So you could say, who's your favorite character? And then you could offer a frame that says, my favorite character is blank because I like blank. And giving them that sentence frame visually can often help them at least get going. And I find that one particularly helpful for students that are entering into this kind of interaction pattern and may need some scaffolding to get used to how these interaction patterns work. So I'm going to just stop here for a second and do a quick comprehension check here and check the chat. Yes, turn and talk is another great one. Peer feedback, having them discuss in small groups and allowing them to rehearse and repeat in small groups can be really helpful as well. Okay. Who has a question about any of this so far, or any more comments that you'd like to make either verbally or in the chat? There's a lot of work that's been done on what they call the IRE or the IRF pattern, that initiation, response, feedback, or initiation, response, evaluation. And there have been some really interesting insights. And I think this is one of the areas where linguistics and interactional linguistics can be really helpful to teachers. Oftentimes, teachers don't take linguistics or interactional linguistics classes in training unless you're specifically training for TESOL. But I think this is one area that can help all teachers, regardless of content area, to be cognizant of this pattern, and that the pattern is very helpful for student learning. It certainly is a great way to impart content area expertise that you have to students and to check for understanding. But it does carry the disadvantage of predisposing teachers to talk most of the time. And so just raising awareness about that and what alternatives are, I think can be really powerful for teachers. Another one that I think was a finding that is worth sharing today before we move to our last topic was done maybe about 2007 or 2008, where it was discovered that positive feedback has a lot of really helpful purposes, but it also has one purpose that was unintended, that was discovered in the research. Positive feedback, of course, can encourage students, can validate their responses, but also that the word very good tended to shut down the conversation. And one of the things that some researchers found is that when we overuse things like very good, if another student had a question, they kind of read that very good as correct answer has been found, this is over, we're going to move to the next topic. And so what the recommendation for teachers is if you give praise to students, which is, certainly warranted and can be very helpful in building classroom climate, to keep the conversation open by saying, who else has a question or who else has something to add? Because that way students understood that, oh, I can still ask my question if I have one. This conversation isn't necessarily closed just because somebody found the right answer. Or saying things like, did anybody have another answer? Things like that will help to keep it open so that not only will your students have more opportunities to practice the language, but if any student had trouble getting the answer or had further questions about it, then they're more likely to ask if you keep that pattern open and allowing for more students to come in and take part in the conversation. All right. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, so we're going to move on to comprehension check. I'll share the screen. And do you want to take over from here? I don't want to talk over you the whole time.
Sure, I'm happy to talk.
Okay.
So let's see. In the chat, I see a comment. I recently saw a recommendation that instead of asking the class, does anyone have questions? We should ask, what questions do you have? So you have read our minds. So what researchers have found is that just like very good can be a topic ender in a sequence, so can any questions. And when we look across classroom discourse as a whole, we find that teachers use any questions to actually mean any questions, like ask your question right now. But they also use it to signal that this is a transition point and we are ending one sequence and beginning another. And so very often any questions kind of comes to mean this topic is over. And the asking of any questions would reopen it. And while it's possible, we're done here. And so the recommendation in recent years has been, if you go to the next slide, Catherine, that we check for understanding instead of using yes, no questions, like any questions, yes or no, which also is kind of face threatening, right? Like sometimes people are like, I have a question, but I'm not asking it. Rephrasing it to something like, what questions do you have? Presupposes that there would be questions. Rather than asking something, and I see this one a lot, do you know what to do? If I get asked that, and do you know what to do? I pretty much always answer yes, even when the answer is no, because I'm embarrassed and I don't want to tell people I don't understand what's going on. One way to check for comprehension then is to say, okay, so what will you do first? What will you do next? I find very often when I'm in office hours with students and we go over like a whole plan, say for how they're going to revise an essay, if I say to them, so do you know what to do? They always answer yes. But if I say, okay, so our meeting's almost over. When you go home, what are you going to do first on this essay? I get a really much more elaborate and interesting answer. And if I leave time in case they don't know what to do, it gives me another chance to go back and craft a plan with the student. Third one here, do you understand? Can be phrased to asking specific questions, like tell me what X is, right? So rather than saying, do you understand, yes or no, you can move right up to tell me what this is. Tell me what photosynthesis is. Explain to me what a polymer is. And kind of, not in a threatening way, but in a way to really try to get a sense of where students are. Because one of the most difficult things we do as teachers is trying to figure out what other people know. That's why we have the IRE or IRF sequence at our disposal. But it's very challenging because it is embarrassing to not know. And so sometimes the knee-jerk answer is, yes, I understand. Or some of you have probably experienced this one too. I don't understand anything. Do you know what to do? No. Do you have any idea what to do? No. How are you going to start? I don't know. What will you do first? Right? And so trying to kind of move to a place where you can build some trust so that students can say when they don't know takes some work. It takes some work. And one of the ways you can get there is by trying to develop classroom routines and practices that make space for not knowing and make it kind of a little less threatening when you don't know or you don't understand, to try to puzzle through with students what those difficulties might be. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask you to put in the chat one thing that stood out to you today in this workshop. So if you want to just put in the chat one thing that stood out to you, something, it could be a word, it could be a phrase. A lot of people saying slow down. Yeah.
Well, we're all from the Northeast of the United States, which is, notoriously very fast speaking. So I completely am right there as well. Even during the workshop, I hear myself phrasing things in ways that I think, oh, if I could do that again, I'd rephrase. The word circumlocution, yes. It's a big hit.
A lot of slow down, signposting, checking for understanding.
Yeah, IRE, and there is an extensive body of research on the IRE in linguistics, which I think is sometimes doesn't make its way into professional development as often as I think it could.
I think well, let me say this. What questions do you have? Feel free to put some questions in the chat. Are there things that you're still wondering about? Strategies and ideas always sound great in workshops, but in real life, especially with language learners, sometimes the easiest answer to give is yes or no. And what they're really hoping to do is shut down the conversation, so you as the teacher will move to someone else, right? It's not that they maybe don't want to answer, they're just nervous, they're not sure, so they're just hoping you're going to go on to someone else.
And
I see
for me, one thing I found helpful is, even if if you're asking them a question in front of others, maybe yes, no is enough, especially if you know that they're developing or they're new. And then if you have an opportunity while the class is doing work, or if the classes are in groups, to elicit more elaborate responses, that can be helpful as well.
In the spring, oh, Jeff, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
I just had a question, like if you had any advice on like specific instructional strategies for ESL students, like I don't know, for example, like teaching grammar, or like teaching like spelling and silent letters in English, because there's some weird idiosyncrasies with English that are different from can be challenging for ESL students. I was wondering if you had any insight on how to teach that.
So you're asking a big question that has a lot of different answers. I think that I think making language forms salient, highlighting language forms, and in your talk and interaction with learners, highlighting, repeating Keeping the range small and building on what people already know are always tried and true strategies. Things like spelling and grammar are patterns that we learn. And so lots of repetition and lots of exposure help. But also lots of checks, asking learners to produce and to produce what it is you want to see is helpful too, right? Like that's also helpful. If you have more specific questions, Jeff, feel free to put them, to email us. We're going to put our
Yes,
email
and
addresses
vocabulary
in the
workshop
chat.
tomorrow, as Tim mentioned.
Okay,
That
yeah,
might-
there's stuff tomorrow too, right? Okay.
A good resource for students working with new ESL, new students with little to no English. That's probably a good email question as well.
I would say Paraguay and Boyle. It's called, I'm putting it in the chat, Reading, Writing, and Learning in ESL is a really nice book. Larry Ferlazzo has a blog that has tons and tons of posts. Those are helpful. Sadia, I see your hand up, so I want to make sure we get there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you're asking, mentioning the yes and no answers, I think, this was, I brought this up when we had the breakout rooms. It was one of the courses I did in the cohort, the masters in the ESL, is that it's very important to have the right body language and try and incorporate the child's culture, their language, food, sport, anything like that, to bring a comfort zone to them, to make them comfortable. Because if you imagine, I just, I'm lucky I came to America. It may not have been American English, but I spoke English. And, just to put yourself in the shoes of these kids, some of them have come from foreign countries, and not understanding something, just, recognizing, appreciating their culture, create a comfort zone for them. And, you kind of break down the barrier from them. And you kind of, even the way you're talking, the way your shoulders are, you are the teacher, definitely. You have the authority, definitely, but to show you're approachable and that, that they can come, they can speak to you, and they can open up to you more.
That's huge. And I think it also speaks to the idea of, we were talking about language forms that are recognizable, but just items, objects, something familiar, some touchstone in the classroom makes a huge, huge difference. And because it is really scary to be new. Let's see. I see, Jeff, your hand is up. Did you want to add something else?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I just had I guess a comment too on that, to piggyback off of that. Do you have any strategies? Because this was one thing I was struggling with last year with my middle school students. I was trying to get them I was telling them basically, don't be afraid to make mistakes in class, and it's okay to, if you have a mispronunciation. It's hard to get them into a comfort zone for them. I guess, how do you do it as more seasoned ESL teachers?
What I do is the less I expect spontaneous production from them in the beginning, the better, right? So because I have a lot of students, even though I'm teaching at university level, I have a lot of students from China who come and it's their first time in the US. And I find giving them a heads up, if I don't ask them questions, cold calling them right away. Eventually, though, I do, right? Because eventually you do have to get used to the atmosphere in our classroom, which is more seminar style, it's more discussion based. But I try to kind of scaffold them into it by giving them alternate ways to participate, like an asynchronous board. I don't know if that's possible in in a middle school setting.
Turn and talk in middle school, right?
Turning and talking.
Write it down, say it to your friend next to you. All those things work.
Right. So that you're not asking them to produce right away in front of the class off the top of their heads, particularly with teenagers who have a really, fragile sense of identity at times. So that's what I try to do. But again, it is a scaffolding process. So eventually I tell students, eventually you will need to kind of get used to the idea that we, teachers call on you and you're expected to answer, so that they see it as like they are eventually going to be participating with the whole community, right? But at first, to kind of give them options for participating outside of that.
Also, choral drills, like, look, anything where you can answer in the group, that way you can kind of say it out loud, but if you say it wrong or you make an error somehow, everyone doesn't hear you, right? Because it's not just you on the stage giving the answer. I think also, to be fair, when we open ourselves up and make mistakes in front of students and act like human beings, that helps a lot too. That goes a long way for creating kind of a less stressful atmosphere in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, even here in Chile, these were all professors that I was working with because they want to start to give content courses in English, but it wasn't exactly a professor-led initiative. It was a policy-led initiative. And some of them were not super happy to be in the class because they felt very uncomfortable with their English level. And just me learning Spanish in front of them, showing them my Duolingo and telling them about all my mistakes really helped to break the ice. Because, I didn't realize just how destabilizing it is when you're not working in your first language and how embarrassing it can be, and so by even just making myself vulnerable, I think that really helped to break the ice, even with adults as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Maya says the same thing. Yes, be vulnerable a little bit, be a human being. It will go a long way. In any case, all right, it's 5:30, so we don't want to keep you, but if you have more questions or you want to stay on, Catherine and I will stay on for a bit. But otherwise, you have our emails. Good luck to all of you. And enjoy your workshop tomorrow with Tim.
Yeah, have a great time, everybody. It was wonderful to meet you and see some of you again. Thank you.
Thank you.